I'm Jimmy Bach, and this is History with Jimmy, along with my producer, Chandler Holmes. This is episode 13. I think that anybody that watches that is going to learn some history from the area, and of course that's what History with Jimmy is all about. I'm going to show some pictures, some items, and the first one goes back to when there were flooding, but it was by ice jams. And the first one that you're going to see is this one right here. Okay, and that one shows people standing alongside and how high the ice was. The second one is going to show where they are standing alongside the railroad tracks. And so you can see the people there as well. I believe my producer is zooming in here to be able to see these pictures. That was one of the requests that we had from people that had previously seen some of the other episodes. This one is a very rare picture because it shows one of the wooden bridges, but it shows how the ice built up against the river bridge. And one of the river bridges was wiped out by an ice jam. Another one was burned down by fire, and then the last one was taken down when they built the cement bridge in 1919. Next thing that I'm going to be showing you are some pictures, and we just got these. And this has to do with the railroad. And if you're going up Route 11 and you come by the red light there where the turn to Hunlock's Creek, you'll see a train station. The train station is falling completely apart, but here, this is the original way the train station was, and Route 11 is where the train actually went, and you can see it in this particular picture. Now, obviously, if you come to the museum later on, you'll be able to get a little bit better look at these, but these were just given to us by Eileen Lewis Kregel, who donated these pictures to the museum. And Bonnie at the upstairs gallery had framed all these pictures. But this one says the Hunlock's Creek and Train Depot, and this picture is from 1898 to 1900. So this is a pretty rare picture, the fact that it shows the train station being in a completely different position than it is right now. The second one shows the same picture, but it shows it looking down Route 11 rather than up Route 11. And again, this is from 1898 to 1911, and things are a little different today than they were back then. The next one shows Shickshinny's train station, and this is one that was from the 1930s. There was a train station in the upper end of town. It is presently behind, well, it was behind where Curry Donuts is. Today they're having a race up there, and so it was right next to Susquehanna Avenue. Passenger service stopped there in 1949, but commercial service continued on, and then the '72 flood eventually took that and demolished the building, and then it got hauled away. To me, this is probably one of the rarest pictures that you're going to see, and this one is unique because it's older than the 1930 picture, and there's a horse and buggy that you can see over here. But this is really what's unique about this picture, and you have to come to the museum to see it, because there's a building across the street, and it looks like there's a lady on the porch, but she's actually standing on the other side of the railing, and I don't know if she's getting ready to jump down into the wagon or what, but it's a really very unique picture and stuff. So we're glad that we're able to get this one framed, but if you come to the museum, you'll be able to get a little bit closer picture of this. So now we're going to talk about the canal. And I'm going to show you some pictures first of the canal, and then I'm going to read about the canal. Here's a picture looking at the canal, and this is from 1898 to 1900. This is the north of the Hunlock's Creek, approaching the train station. So you can see how big the canal was. next one, this is a picture. We actually have this particular picture in a much bigger picture than what you're seeing here. But this is a picture showing there would be retreat prison. And in this particular one, you can see the mules are pulling the boat down the canal, and the guys stopped the train in order to be able to watch this canal boat coming down the canal. And then the last one is, this is in the upper end of Canal Street, because that's why canal is called Canal Street, because it was the canal. And this is looking down Canal Street. The post office would be over here. So that's one of the there. And again, we have this in a much bigger picture. So I'm going to read the history that we have about canals, because canals were very important for transportation, for getting goods to go to certain parts. But I'm going to start out. The Susquehanna River provides the means for navigation before the canals were constructed. So in 1771, the Pennsylvania Assembly declared the Susquehanna River a public highway, and money was appropriated to make it navigable. The experiment was called the first boat. So it was constructed in Nescopec and pulled by horses. 3 steamboats were built in 1825. One was the Susquehanna, which was involved in the most tragic river accident on the Susquehanna River. And on May 3rd, 1826, while attempting to run the rapids at Nescopec Falls, I never knew Nescopec had falls until I read this article. This was considered the most difficult rapids of the whole trip. So all about 20 left the boat, and they walked along the shore, and many others were there to cheer the boat and the passengers on the rapids. So the safety valve was held down to raise the steam pressure to the boiler to aid for the strong river current at this point. Then with extra steam pressure in the boiler, the trip was started, and in the most difficult part, the boat turned, it hit a rock, and it instantly exploded. 2 of the men were killed instantly. One died within an hour. The engineer, he lived for a few days. 3 slowly recovered. 2 were severely scalded. 5 were somewhat more or less scalded or wounded. The Susquehanna boat was built in Baltimore. It was 82 feet long, 2 stern wheels, 30 horsepower engine, and built to carry 100 passengers. This was its trial run trip. And after accidents of this kind, the river was given up as means for transportation, for it was too dangerous and too many delays due to the condition of the river, so the construction of a network of canals became necessary. So that's why the canals were built. And in February 1825, the Pennsylvania State Assembly passed a General Internal Improvement Act at a cost of $40 million. Imagine that, $40 million in 1825. That was a lot of money. A State Internal Improvement Convention was convened in Harrisburg in August 1825. The representatives from Luzerne County were Nathan Beach, who was very prominent in the community and had a lot to do with the development of Shickshinny and also the canal. And Jacob Sist was the other one. Both were residents of Shickshinny. To construct the canals in that day and age was very difficult. Now just imagine what equipment they would have back then. I'm going to read to you now. The equipment that was available at the time were oxen, a plow, a pick, a shovel, and a wheelbarrow. And it wasn't only the canal or waterway to dig, but locks had to be built so the boats could be raised or lowered. Also, aqueducts had to be built so the creek could flow through underneath the canal. So at some place, the riverbank had to be riprap with stone to keep the river from washing the earth away that lay between the canal and the river. Well, guess what? If you come to this museum, you will see a picture of an aqueduct, and it may be the only one that's available in this area. And also, we have a gentleman that built something to show you how they worked for raising and lowering the river. And also, if you were going across the bridge to go from Shickshinny to Makanakwa, and if you look on the Shickshinny side, you will see the stones that are on the wall there that has to do with what they're telling here. So in 1832, the Susquehanna River flooded, rising the waters, damaging the newly constructed canal. And on the 4th of July, 1828, ground was broken at Berwick to continue the canal to Shickshinny. According to eyewitnesses, the day's activities went like this. A plow was held by Nathan Beach and was drawn by a splendid yoke of ox, owned and driven by Alexander Jamison. The loose dirt was removed by men with wheelbarrows. A rock was blasted, a cannon was fired, whiskey was drunk, and all returned to their homes happy and buoyant with the hopes of a glorious future. The Peace of Assembly was distributed by 5 displays of pugilistic science, better known as fistfights, and an absolute essential at all gatherings in those days, just to soothe certain people's emotions. In 1 year's time, the canal was completed. Imagine, 1 year with oxen, wheelbarrows, dirt, men, and a plow is how this canal was completed. That's unbelievable to me. And the aqueduct to carry the canal over the Shickshinny Creek that flows through the town, 2 small lakes to park the canal boats when not in use was made at the lower end of the town. So we do have a picture of that aqueduct. And so if you come to the museum, you'll be able to see that. The first boat was built by John Coombs and named Wyoming. 1 year later, the canal was completed from Shickshinny to Nanticoke, then launched into Wyoming in the canal of Shickshinny and was compelled to tow the boat to Nanticoke due to lack of sufficient water in the newly constructed canal. There at Nanticoke, it was loaded with 10 tons of anthracite coal and some flour that was then turned into a chute that was constructed in the Nanticoke Dam and sent down the Susquehanna River. Then, by the way of the Union and Schuylkill canals, onto Philadelphia. There was a cargo. It was replaced by 15 tons of dry goods on the return trip. The boat got icebound at New Buffalo, and its contents had to be loaded on sleds and hauled to Wilkes-Barre. The canal was a major factor in the history of Shickshinny, for it tied or connected the town to the industrial centers of the eastern part of the United States. So Shickshinny was connected to the eastern part of the United States because of the canal and the goods that they shipped. The old canal boats were used to tell the farmers how the horses and wagons would be lined up the entire length of Union Street here in Shickshinny for this gala event. And the whole town took on a festive mood when they would hear the sound of the boatmen's big tin horn, which could be heard for long distances at a time. At different times, there would be parties held when certain boats would dock. Some canal boats were built for freight only, but others were built for passenger service, like the packet boat, which had ladies' cabins in the bow of the boat and was built for 8 ladies. The cabin was handsomely decorated with table, chairs, and beds to accommodate all, was neat and comfortable. Next is the gentleman's room, large enough for many passengers. It had a bar with the choicest liquors, a table where passengers could eat breakfast, dine. It contained beds and bunks for all male passengers. And the cooking was done in superior style in the kitchen for all to dine. As stated before, the coming of the canal boats to the town was announced. The canal boats blew the big tin horn. The curious would gather around to hear news and happenings, and that's how news was told to everybody, or people found out about things. The canal provided an avenue for early development of the mineral wealth that lay in the valley, and when a coal barge docked underneath the bridge trestle to be loaded with coal, the teams of horses and wagons available were pressed into service so as to load the barge as quickly as possible with the trapdoor in the trestle floor, and one wagon box floor helped to speed up the loading of the barge. Then local coal businesses for the time worked. Most of the work was done by Shickshinny labor, which greatly helped the local economy. For a period of 15 years, from 1830 to 1845, the picturesque canal boat controlled the destiny of Wyoming Valley. Somewhat longer at Shickshinny. For the time, the town had both the canal and the railroad. But the railroad was actually what put the canals out of business. Rapid material growth and commercial advance marked the end of this period, for railroads were cheaper to build and could operate all year while canals would freeze up in cold weather. The canal packet boat began a slow decline, which ended in its complete disappearance. Shortly after the end of the Civil War, Miss Natalie Beach Creary of Shickshinny, daughter of Nathan Beach Creary, was a passenger aboard the last canal boat from Berwick to Shickshinny. The trip marked the closing of a colorful era in the history of Shickshinny. The fare on a packet boat was 5 cents a mile, including meals. When a packet boat would stop at a lock meal time, some passengers would get off for a short walk with the gate or to hear news or give some in exchange. This gave some freeloaders a chance to mingle with the passengers, then get on the boat unnoticed and have a good meal, then get off at the next lock, their purse no lighter because the free meal never paid for anything. How about that? In those days, the canal was one way folks got their news. But when the railroads took over, they got flash news from telegraph operators at the railroad station. A story was told about some sharks who made a deal with the telegraph operator at the railroad station to get the outcome of a heavyweight fight that was being fought in a western town when the Cornish and Irish were fighting it out for the heavyweight championship. As soon as those sharks got the outcome of the fight from the telegraph, they took off to the hotels where the fighting fever was at a boiling point. The sharks gave the fight fans a 2-for-1 offer. Needless to say, their money was covered as soon as it was laid down. The sharks made a good haul for one night, but that trick didn't last very long as soon as everyone got wise. Now, this age, telephone fans seem to fight better than the ones fight at ringside. That is the end of the history of the canal. But there's one last thing that I want to bring up, and it's called incidents that we can take no pride in. In every town's history, there are incidents in which citizens can take no pride. The following episode in 1857 bears out Shickshinny's adventure of this type. A building was erected, a general store was opened, operated by Nathan Garrison and Andrew Eldon. Working in partnership, a short time after the store's opening, Eldon was entrusted with $3,000 in gold to purchase new goods. The goods arrived, but Eldon absconded for China with the gold, or so he thought. Wow. The ship that he was on broke up in a storm, and Eldon, weighted down with the gold and his sins, sank while trying to reach a lifeboat. Mr. Garrison, without the funds to pay his creditor, was forced to close his business and sold out to Nathan Beach Creary. At another time, Mr. Henry Lou Moyer, whose education was limited but had a creative mind and was mechanically inclined, invented what he called an anti-friction barrier, where a revolving staff ran on steel rolls that were encased in a bearing box. This type of bearing is widely known today as a roller bearing, and Mr. Moyer, not knowing how to go about getting his invention patented, entrusted a local druggist to do it for him. The druggist readily agreed to get the patent for Mr. Moyer. The druggist went ahead with the deal, but when the patent was granted, the druggist was the patentee. The druggist immediately left town. Mr. Moyer followed the druggist to the West End coast, and finally, out of funds, he returned home going from stone quarry to stone quarry, splicing steel cables, a trade he learned in the coal mines. The quarries were glad for his help, and the druggist was never heard from again. And the last thing is, in 1918, Mr. Ray Curwood was chief of police in the borough of Shickshinny. A mentally deranged man named Beach Falls was in the mountain inn with a handgun, and he made a threat that he was going to shoot a certain person. Chief Curwood was notified about the threat on the person's life, and he went to the hotel to take the gun. Not thinking that Falls was dangerous as he went to school with him, the chief asked Falls for the gun. Falls instead pulls the gun out, began firing, hitting the chief twice, once in the leg and once in the stomach. 10 days later, Chief Curwood died from gangrene, and Falls died several later while in jail. Mr. Curwood is buried at the Pine Hill Cemetery. And lastly, we have William Balliet, a lumberman from Cunningham. Came in the morning from Hazleton, met several companions in Mackinac. At that time, he had a check for $200, a lot of money in that time. He got his check cashed in Shickshinny, and it became known to his companions that when he went to a hotel near the train station, he left about 8 o'clock. He was headed to Pond Hill to see his in-laws, but he never made it. The next morning, someone found his body on the railroad tracks. The officials reasoned that Balliet was followed by somebody. The person assaulted him and took his valuables. Those valuables included the money and a gold watch. The suspect left him laying on the railroad tracks in a hopeless condition until a freight train came and killed him. Well, this is Jimmy Bach, along with the producer, Chandler Holmes, signing off on episode 13. And this was History of Jimmy. And if you like it, please click on the like button and pass it on to someone else. Thank you again for watching.